challenges.
It takes a while to build more infrastructure. It takes about roads, utilities, and all this. So we have to adjust to this and on a scale that we've never had to do before.
Public services like healthcare or education will face higher pressures.
Alberta, we're a country with the fastest growing population in the world, exceeding anything you see in Africa. So that's a big deal.
The province says it will ensure Albertans have access to services, but has previously projected the population will keep going up, jumping from 4.7 to more than 5 million later this decade. Anis Haydari, CBC News, Calgary.
There are growing calls for Ontario to halt its plans to mine for minerals used in electric vehicles. The race for lithium, why Indigenous groups say it needs to slow down. An astronaut and 2 cosmonauts finally return after getting stuck in space.
Touchdown. Rubio's record ride comes to an end.
And
thanks for being here today.
An epic memory for a BC Boys' first concert.
What? How is this happening?
We're back in 2.
We're coming to see Coldplay.
100 meters to go. The crew being told to brace for touchdown.
Fantastic. Yeah, everybody did really well.
That is a look of a safe return for U.S. astronaut Frank Rubio after more than a year in space, 371 days, aboard the International Space Station, to be exact. That is a new American record. Rubio and 2 Russian cosmonauts touched down in Kazakhstan today. They were originally scheduled to return earlier this year, but they were stuck in space after their Soyuz spacecraft was damaged. First Nations leaders in Northern Ontario are pushing back against planned mining projects. And as Eva Musa shows us, they were joined today by thousands hoping to send a message to the Premier.
Thousands demanded a meeting with Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Formed by multiple Indigenous groups earlier this year, members of the First Nations Land Defence Alliance marched to the provincial legislature to stop mining development on their lands in Northern Ontario.
It's important for us as Indigenous people because it's our way of life.
At issue, this crescent-shaped deposit, discovered in 2007 in Treaty 9 territory. Home to more than a dozen First Nations, it contains minerals like lithium, crucial to electric vehicle batteries, smartphones, and laptops.
We want to block all the traffic.
Some here say the province is granting mining claims without their consent in an effort to jumpstart a billion-dollar industry.
Each community, First Nations, is entitled to their own opinions and to their own affairs, but we're saying that we don't want mining in our traditional territory.
Ontario's Indigenous Affairs Minister says while he appreciates their position, there are other First Nations in the region who want development.
These are communities who see this as a progressive opportunity to create a new path forward to prosperity, improve the infrastructure in their communities, ensure that their young people have opportunities.
Chief Chris Munoz says his community is not against development, but his people must be a part of the process.
We're a pro-development community, but consultation, accommodation has to be done in a way that we understand.
Members of the First Nations Land Defence Alliance say they want a halt to mining exploration on their traditional lands, and they want to meet with the Premier face-to-face. They also warn they'll set up blockades if mining projects move ahead. Idil Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
Some Canadians adopted from South Korea are learning their adoption was based on a lie.
I feel angry.
CBC News investigates the misleading records and the search for answers.
They found my birth father.
The Sikh resistance in India.
No, ma'am, there is no Khalistani movement in Punjab.
We're in the Punjab to get reaction. But first,
did I choose the right career path going into farming?
A wet summer may mean a fall with few pumpkins. The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next. Kia and Hyundai are recalling more than 600,000 vehicles in Canada over fears they could burst into flames even when the engine isn't running. Several models built between 2010 and 2017 are affected, from compact cars to SUVs. Owners are warned to park outside and away from buildings until the repairs are made. It could be a little harder to find that perfect pumpkin this year. Canadian farmers have been dealing with a tough growing season. Jamie Strachan looks at how some are trying to adapt.
With about a month to go before Halloween, it's time to harvest the pumpkins on this farm just west of Toronto. And it's hardly a bumper crop.
We see nothing but weeds because the pumpkins that were germinating and beginning to grow got flooded out.
This farmer estimates nearly half his crop was lost. Rain, almost every day during key growing times, left fields underwater. Last year was even worse, but for a different reason.
Last summer was very dry, very hot. We could hardly get enough water to the pumpkins. This year, with rain almost every day through July, August.
In Quebec, excessive rain also flooded fields. Many say it's had a catastrophic impact on crops.
It used to be like 1 or 2 major events per year, but now it's almost every week there's a major climatic event. So that's a huge change for our sector.
Genevieve Grossenbacher owns this farm and also works with Farmers for Climate Solutions. She says farmers are being creative and adapting on the fly, but Canada needs to invest much more to help them become more climate resilient.
If you compare the investments Canada has made in agriculture and climate change adaptation compared to other countries, we are really far behind.
Experts say the impacts of boomeranging weather patterns will only get worse.
So in an area that already saw some potentially pretty wild swings in weather, we're now seeing some of those swings maybe even being somewhat greater in extent.
For young farmers, increasingly volatile weather has made navigating an already difficult industry even harder.
It is challenging. Yeah, sometimes I think, did I choose the right career path going into farming because it seems ever more unpredictable.
But for now, Halloween is around the corner. You will harvest what's here and hope next year is better. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Milton, Ontario.
All right, now it's time to go deeper into the news that's shaping your world. The controversial dream of a Sikh homeland was born in Punjab. People there tell us how little it means to them. But first, shocking revelation shakes some Canadians to their core. This is the breakdown. Their life story began with a lie.
You know, it was like that piece of me that was missing.
Korean Canadians adopted as orphans learn their birth parents may in fact be alive.
I love you, Mommy.
I miss you. I love you. They say Canada ignored the evidence of families being torn apart. Our investigative team uncovered details and stories never heard before. Priscilla Kisan Huang breaks down the heartache and sorrow of people coming to grips with the truth of how they got here.
My name is Ki Son. I also go by Priscilla. I'm a journalist and a proud Korean Canadian. Yet lately, I've been digging into a deep, dark period of our past. In the decades after the Korean War, widespread poverty and social pressures paved the way for countless babies to be sent for adoption.
Every baby in this room has been abandoned. 500 children a month are exported for adoption with government approval.
South Korea seemed to have a surplus of babies, and demand was high from Western countries. Many ended up with well-intentioned families around the world, including here in Canada. CBC News cameras were there in 1968 when the first Korean adoptees arrived in Toronto to much fanfare. Today, those toddlers are now grown adults, many naturally curious about their lineage. But what they're beginning to find is that every little clue about their origins may have been a lie.
My name is Randa Ray Tyndale. I'm a Korean Canadian adoptee.
My name is Michael Finn.
My name is Evelyn Forrest.
Carl Johnson.
Jennifer Duffy. Sana Brock.
I'm a Canadian Korean adoptee, and I want the truth.
I want the truth. I want the truth.
My name is Kelly Foston, and I want the truth.
I got to grow up in this. I just shake my head and go, wow. I feel like I had a regular upbringing. I felt like one of the family. All my needs were taken care of. Did camping, did trips to Disneyland. Happy childhood.
Kelly Foston was born Yoon Soo Chun. She was adopted at the age of 4 by a family in White Rock, BC.
I grew up eating potatoes and pasta, and everything was Western. And I didn't know anything different because I couldn't remember anything about Korea.
Here in your... Details in the original paperwork she arrived with were scarce. Father, unknown. Mother, no record.
This paperwork was what my parents knew. They didn't know much more to tell me.
Based on what was written, Kelly grew up believing she was an orphan and that both her parents had died.
So I kept asking.
And it wasn't until recently that Kelly wanted to see if she had any family members in her birth country.
If I don't search now, I may never know what it feels like to have a blood relative. This is who I am. This is where I come from.
Despite knowing little about her past, Kelly holds on to her Korean documents so dearly. She asks if I could help her translate them. One thing I noticed to try to find any clues. I want to talk to you about 2 words in Korean. Ki-a versus ko-a. Ki-a literally means abandoned child in Korean. Ko-a literally means an orphan. But I noticed a shift, and I want to show you this document. This is the first time that you are officially an
orphan.
An orphan on paper. How could Kelly be both an orphan and an abandoned child? Who exactly abandoned her? It took 49 years for you to get this paperwork.
Yeah.
A new document she received this spring out of the blue added to the complexity. The adoption agency told her they had found her birth father in Korea, meaning her original papers that said father no record were false.
As a adoptee trying to learn about my origins, that's a big deal. People played God. Thank you so much for doing this, because without that, I needed a Korean that I trusted.
Kelly's story is not unique. We spent months speaking to dozens of Korean adoptees. Some had more clues than others about their birth parents. Regardless, every single adoptee arrived with an orphan certificate, officially cutting them off from any family in South Korea.
My name is Kim Alexander McKay, but my Korean name is Kim Jung-soo. I was adopted in 1975, straight from Korea to East Vancouver.
And you had your original Korean documents. What did they say about you?
Well, I was left by my family. Yeah, I was abandoned on the street.
Kim McKay grew up feeling alone in the world. Why had his parents abandoned him? He lived half his life heartbroken. For a while, he didn't even know he was Korean. One day, by a miraculous fluke, his birth mother was able to track him down.
Once the DNA test came back, it was like I looked at my wife and my 2 young children. I was like, we're going to Korea. They opened the door and this woman walks in. She's pretty much knocked my kids to the side and grabbed me, and she started screaming and crying. And, it was like that piece of me that was missing.
After he met his mom, she told him the true story behind his adoption.
My parents divorced, and my grandmother decided to put me up for adoption.
Kim shares his paperwork with me as well.
And right there, it says, you were just found.
Yeah, they said that I was abandoned on the street, and now I know that that wasn't true either. My grandmother dropped me off, and my poor mom, she had no clue.
Kim says he's simply lucky. Having a blood bond an ocean away means the world to him. But he doesn't speak Korean. His mom doesn't speak English, meaning he can't just casually call her to chat. So I help him.
Amma. I want to introduce you to my friend Priscilla.
안녕하세요. 제 이름은 황기선이고요. 지금 캐나다의 방송국에 일하는 기자예요. She said I love you.
I love you, mommy.
사랑한대요.
It's funny because I was 49 years old and I'm no longer an orphan. I actually belong to a family now.
Kim's mother spent 30 years wondering if her son was dead or alive and where he could be in the world. We managed to connect with her in Seoul. Seo Dong-nim talks about having her son taken away from her against her will simply because she was divorced.
깜짝 놀랐어요. 그냥 깜짝 놀래고 막 거의 한 보름 가까이 먹지도 않고 그 이후로 우리 식구들은 무슨 불문율 같이 이 정수에 대한 얘기를 아무도 안 했어요. I miss you, I love you, 우리 정수, I miss you.
The pain of what happened is still so raw. South Korean society is grappling with the painful truth of its adoption history. Children shuffled out overseas to avoid shame, adoption agencies cashing in, all of it signed off by the South Korean authorities. Lee Kyung-eun is a former director of Amnesty International Korea, who now heads up Human Rights Beyond Borders.
I would say that the relevant authorities of South Korean government worked as a factory of mass production of orphan documents.
She's calling out the deceptive tactics by both adoption agencies and government authorities.
The orphan documents were produced and issued by government authorities. But I can find no evidence that each individual case was really assessed and investigated by those authorities to figure out that those children were really orphaned or not. This orphan making procedure was totally illegal. That was really a big tragedy in the history of this country.
But what about Canada? There are clues in this faded photo of a baby who was kidnapped in South Korea. The toddler was adopted into Canada and raised by a BC family. That case prompted us to dig through decades of once classified material on international adoptions at the National Archives in Ottawa. There were calls for a full-scale investigation into all Korean adoptions, but we couldn't find records of any such action. We came across old letters and telegrams raising alarm bells, some calling the kidnapping case a predicament, a serious complication.
Hi, Dad. How's it going?
Really good.
So adoptions of so-called Korean orphans kept happening, which allowed for people like Kelly Foston to arrive on our shores 4 years after that kidnapping case.
You've only scratched the surface of this. Are you finding it overwhelming?
Very much so.
It appears federal officials never directly cautioned Canadians, including Kelly's adoptive father, Jim Foston.
If I had have had the opportunity of knowing...
He's now learning from his daughter that the adoption papers that were handed to him decades ago were very misleading.
My first impression when I heard this, what was that? That was like human trafficking? Were we talking about human trafficking? I was with the RCMP. I had a top secret security clearance. I wasn't going to do anything illegal that was going to jeopardize that. It just wouldn't have happened. But I would have been pissed off, livid. Would I have changed anything? No. When I think of all the memories that we have of her growing up from the time she arrived until going through school, not a snowball's chance in hell. Because look what we've got. We got Kelly, didn't we?
I can't even express it in words.
For Kelly, the bombshell discovery that she has a birth father who may still be alive brings her more anger when it should bring her joy.
I want the Canadian government to investigate. I want them to figure out and look into the cases. How could Canada have gone into agreements? Did they know about this?
Kelly longs for a relationship with her birth parents, whose whereabouts the Korean Adoption Agency appears to know, but refuses to share, citing privacy reasons.
This is sent with all my love and hopes you find the strength to move forward with me.
Kelly decides to write a letter to her birth father. It's all she can do for now.
I want to share with you that I've had a good life. I've been raised to be healthy, strong, and independent. Would you please send a letter to me? Sincerely, Kelly Foston, Yoon Soo-jung.
Kisan, this is extraordinary journalism, and I'm wondering as I watch it, what more you can tell us about the role governments play here, what responsibility they bear?
Well, Adrian, in South Korea, they've launched a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they're looking into the cases of hundreds of adoptees around the world, including one here in Canada. They're tasked with looking into possible allegations of falsification of documents, human rights violations. And meanwhile, here in Canada, the government told us that they are monitoring that inquiry, but they did not comment on the calls from Canadian adoptees for a full-scale investigation here.
All right, well, we know you'll stay on it. Priscilla Kisan Huang, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, how the India-Canada rift is playing out in Punjab.
There's no need to repeat the demands of Palestine. We're happy.
The View from India, next. A surprising truth about the dream of a separate Sikh homeland.
Things have changed a lot.
That movement is at the root of Canada's rift with India.
No, ma'am, there is no Khalistani movement in Punjab.
But in Punjab, where the dream took shape, Sikhs tell us they reject it. Still, as an election looms in India, the crusade for Khalistan remains a hot-button issue. Our South Asia correspondent Salima Shidji breaks down why.
The holiest of temples for Sikh pilgrims, golden in the afternoon light, a place of devotion and to capture memories. The songs religious and spiritual, but But this was also the site of violence and turmoil nearly 40 years ago. An insurgency of armed Sikh separatists fighting for an independent state called Khalistan occupied the temple. Indian soldiers laid siege, eventually storming the holy site. Thousands of Sikhs died in the riots that followed, the pain still raw in Punjab. And yet, many here flatly reject the idea of a Sikh state.
I'm proud to be feel an Indian.
Like Amanpal Singh, who's more worried about the economy.
No, ma'am, there is no Khalistani movement in Punjab. There is a need of the right now, the employment.
A deep concern that ripples through the heart of Punjab, an area that many young people have abandoned to go study abroad. Even if the hot topic of discussion these days is how Ottawa is accusing New Delhi of having a hand in the shooting death of a Canadian Sikh separatist on Canadian soil. What even is Khalistan, Sardur Singh says? We don't know, it's all politics, and we are the ones who suffer. This man was a police officer in the 1980s when anti-Sikh riots gripped the capital. There were dead bodies in the streets, Naseeb Singh Sangna says. Many don't remember the dark days. Why would we want to return to that unrest? There is a fierce anger here at the Indian government in the sense that Punjab has been slighted and not given its due, but also the sense that fighting for Khalistan isn't the answer.
I think there is no need to repeat the demands of Khalistan. We are happy.
Happy as part of India, less happy to be caught in a political game for votes, people here say, by India's ruling BJP intent on deepening divides.
Near elections, they have just an election ploy. Let's talk about Khalistan. Let's create a mess in the people.
We stand for.
There is a section of Sikh society in Punjab that's still fighting, and they argue that support for their movement is strong but silent.
Over here, there is a fear of crackdown. There is a fear of harassment. There is a fear of being booked under draconian laws, which is not the case in Canada, UK, and USA. Whatever we see in diaspora, that is the reflection of the movement in Punjab.
So many people here tell me they fear the power of social media to exaggerate support for Khalistan. They worry that all Sikhs are being branded Khalistanis, terrorists. And most say there's a clear disconnect between how they see the fight for an independent state and how the Sikh diaspora sees it. A view frozen in time.
Abruptly came to an end in 1992-93.
Even though support for Khalistan in Punjab collapsed in the early 90s, says this expert, the diaspora clings to a past that's no longer.
They don't go by the logic. Sometimes they go by the history. Sometimes they go by that glorious period. Okay, that was there. But things have changed a lot.
Changed and evolved, with other more pressing concerns now top of mind. A Sikh state for those here, no longer a priority.
Now, our South Asia correspondent, Salima Shivji, who just saw there, tells us that municipal elections